Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. I recently ran across this video from Money Talks News titled 8 Ways Boomers Save Money That Millennials Ignore. And being that the theme of the past couple years has really been rising costs because of inflation and people struggling to find room in their budget to save and invest, I thought maybe it'd be worth looking at the list and maybe we could get some advice from previous generations on how we could save money. But before we dive into the list, make sure you take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button because it really does help the channel. Number 1 on the list is cook at home more often. And no doubt about it, cooking at home can absolutely help you save money. It's estimated that a restaurant meal costs 5 times the typical home-cooked meal. Cooking at home can be a great way to save money, and I do think people tend to eat out more nowadays than they did in previous generations. A lot of that probably comes down to accessibility. We can order food on our phones. There's more delivery options than ever before. And food is traditionally the 3rd biggest line item in people's budgets, right behind housing and transportation. So if you can find ways to save here, it can definitely make a big impact on your budget. Buy quality items meant to last. I think when it comes to buying quality items, this is where you get the distinction between being frugal and being cheap. Cheap is simply looking for the lowest cost item regardless. So that means maybe you end up buying an item of poor quality, which could end up costing you more money down the road if you have to replace this item more frequently. Whereas if you're frugal, you're tending to look for ways to save money overall. Maybe that means you spend a little bit more on a quality item today, but it lasts for longer. So you end up saving money in the long term. I think buying quality items made to last really can save you money in the long run. But I also think this is where you have to focus on timeless pieces. When it comes to your high-use furniture, think your sofa, your table, or maybe some staple pieces in your wardrobe. Focusing on that timeless aspect often means that you say no to current trends. So you buy a piece that looks great today, as well as 5 years from now, and maybe even 10 years from now. So for example, if you want to buy a sofa, maybe you buy that timeless piece that looks good no matter what phase of life you're in. But if you want something trendy and stylish, rather than making it the loud sofa, maybe you buy crazy pillows. That way, if you change your mind down the road, you can just replace the pillows for say $15. Living below your means in general is something that everyone should absolutely be doing. It's only by living below your means that you actually have room in your budget to save and invest and build a wealthier future. Living in a modest starter home and driving a used car can absolutely be great financial advice, especially if you're just getting started. But I think we have to consider the situation. Let's look at starter homes for a minute. My mom, who neatly falls into this boomer category, paid $10,000 for her first home. It was a trailer. Then a few years later, she upgraded to a modest 2-bedroom brick home. It was $32,000, and that was in the mid-70s. Even if we run an inflation calculator, that $32,000 home would be more like a $180,000 home today. And finding homes that are in the $180,000 range today is pretty difficult, especially if you're in a metro area, it might be impossible. Generally speaking, home prices have increased at a rate that far outpaces the rate of inflation. I remember when my husband and I first started looking for our starter home. I genuinely wanted to find a home that was around $200,000. But that was not possible where we lived. Starter homes in our area were $350,000 or $400,000. It was definitely sticker shock, and so we ended up renting for a few additional years. Not to mention that actually finding a starter home these days is incredibly difficult compared to with, say, 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you could find a 2-bedroom small home. Nowadays, homes are built larger. Inevitably, that makes them more expensive. So really finding this true starter home is much more difficult today. Ultimately, my husband and I decided to go with a townhome because that greatly reduced the cost. If you go with a townhome or a condo, those are often much more affordable than, say, a freestanding home. But you do have to be careful because they often have monthly dues and those can add up quite quickly. Pay with cash. Now there is actually science to this. Study after study have found that when you pay with cash, you tend to spend less because it's more painful to actually part with physical cash compared to simply swiping a debit or a credit card. It just feels more real to physically have the cash leave your hands. And when it comes to cash, it's pretty impossible to overspend. You either have the cash or you don't. That's not necessarily the case when it comes to a card. That's why when you hear people say they try an all cash spending plan, that they tend to spend a lot less. If you've never tried it, I highly recommend it. I've definitely done it before, and I can 100% say it is harder to part with those dollars than it is to simply swipe that card. When I was on like all cash diet, I definitely found myself putting some items back in the grocery store because I didn't want to part with that much cash. Limit credit card usage. I certainly think that baby boomers used credit cards a lot less when they were young adults compared to how frequently credit cards are used by young adults today. But I also think that credit card usage has increased across the board for all age groups. We have to remember that credit cards weren't widely accepted at all places until really the 80s or even into the 90s. So much so that when Burger King started accepting credit cards, it actually made the news.
Cash or credit?
What? The home of the Whopper is offering cash or credit.
I just hope it doesn't slow things down at the cash and carry, that people are going to be having to call New York and get the confirmation or whatever it is, because when I want a Whopper, I want it now.
Just another way to spend money. I'm sure it'll work for people on vacation when they don't have to do something, but I can't imagine it working on a day-to-day basis here.
So yes, I'm sure they use their credit cards a lot less, but credit cards weren't as popular then. They weren't widely accepted by all merchants, and they weren't the most popular payment method like they are today. And there weren't things like online shopping and apps where you can pay with simply clicking a button. So yes, if you aren't using your credit card wisely, it can certainly get you into financial trouble. Make coffee at home. Oh, the good old latte factor. I think the latte factor is an important thing to consider when it comes to personal finances. I don't specifically look at this as being related to coffee itself, but rather the more broad generalization that little daily expenses that you're doing on a regular basis can add up. While I do think it is important to watch those small expenses, because if you're doing them on a daily basis, they certainly can add up, I do think it is more important to focus on your bigger expenses like housing or transportation, because making tweaks in this area will have a bigger impact on your budget than simply, say, giving up a latte. Now, about making coffee at home. Yeah, it's probably true boomers weren't out there spending $5 a day on a latte back in their young adult years. But a lot of this probably comes down to availability. Yes, coffee has always been very popular, but coffee culture as we know it today really started to evolve in the 90s, with Starbucks leading the way. And it's not just coffee, it's basically those frappuccinos and the drinks with the swirls and the whips and really the Franken coffees. I actually did my undergrad at Northern Michigan University, which is the same college Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, graduated from. And because it was his alma mater, we were actually the first university to have a Starbucks on campus. And I remember at the time, it was huge news. And that was back in 2007, I want to say. Moral of the story is, when was the last time you were really excited when a new coffee shop opened up? Probably not for a long time, because there's probably so many around you. That wasn't the case in the 70s. And truly, if you're spending money on coffee every single day, just make sure it fits in your budget. Look at your budget, cut out any unnecessary expenses, even those little ones, because they do add up. Make sure you're spending your dollars intentionally, but don't forget to address those big expenses because they matter more. Maintain vehicles properly. I do think this is solid advice. Vehicles are incredibly expensive, and making sure you maintain them properly helps you get the most out of them. I don't know if people are maintaining their vehicles less these days. I guess it's just not really something I know about, but I do think you should maintain your vehicle properly and try to make it last as long as possible. In 1975, the average new vehicle cost about $5,000. As of January 2024, the average non-luxury vehicle costs about $44,000. So the price of a new vehicle has definitely increased at a rate faster than inflation, because a $5,000 vehicle in 1975 would be like buying a $13,000 vehicle today. And you're probably not going to find a new vehicle these days in that price range. But I do think there is a small silver lining here, in that the new vehicles today are built to last longer. Certain vehicles these days are advertised that they have an engine built to last 200,000 or even 300,000 miles. And while most people certainly aren't driving their vehicles this long, if you did, that would go a long way into saving you money. A few decades ago, cars were only built to last around 100,000 miles or so. So while cars these days are definitely more expensive, they should last longer. So that can help to mitigate the price a bit. Avoid impulse purchases. Depending on the survey you look at, it seems that Americans are spending about $300 a month on impulse purchases. And I guess it really depends on what you consider an impulse purchase. Is an impulse purchase something that you pick up that wasn't on your list when you're walking through a store? Or is it an ad that you click buy on when you're mindlessly scrolling through Instagram? It kind of varies a bit. But if you are spending around $300 a month on impulse purchases, like the average, that would add up to about $3,600 a year. That's a significant amount of money if that money could be better used elsewhere in your life. On the surface level, I do tend to agree that we probably spend a lot more nowadays on impulse purchases, especially compared to previous generations. But again, I think it comes down to availability. I think there's just a lot more stuff available these days. A few decades back, they didn't have things like smartphones, mobile tablets, things like that. Even if we discount electronics, there were really less options everywhere. Clothing stores only changed out their clothes seasonally, maybe 4 times a year. These days, they add new items on what seems like a weekly basis. Same with homewares, or even look at the increased selection in food items in a grocery store. So if we go a few decades back, I think there was less stuff available, and I also think you were marketed to less heavily. But I do think people were still prone to impulse shopping. Case in point, my grandma had a fat jiggle machine. I'm not sure how wise of a purchase that was. And no judgment, because we have all made regrettable purchases. My most noteworthy one was this stupid crystal rock salt that was supposed to work as a natural deodorant. And I even said to my husband as I was using it that this is either gonna work and it's gonna be magic, or I'm a fool who's rubbing a rock on her body. Guess what? I was the fool who was rubbing a rock on her body because it didn't work at all. So if you would, take a moment, share your best, worst purchase that you've wasted money on so we can all get a laugh. I really do think having less options available led to less impulse shopping. And I think marketing these days has a huge impact. Because with our phones, companies can market directly to us multiple times a day. And they truly know how to strike that I need it now feeling. The best way to combat that is I put things in my cart and then I use what I call the 24-hour rule. I don't actually hit purchase. It might sit in the cart, and if I still remember the next day and I still want it, I'll hit purchase. Most of the time, I find that I actually forget about this item and I never go back to my cart. So was it easier for previous generations to save money? Maybe, but if you want to save money, it comes down to one thing, and that is living below your means. And you do that by either cutting your expenses or increasing your income, or a combination of the two. What are your thoughts? Who do you think had the easiest time of saving and investing? Leave it in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.